The descent corridor smelled the same. That was the first thing Kamal noticed, the recycled air bite of a pressurized transit pod, the faint char of re-entry ablative on the hull skin, the particular staleness of a journey too long for the body to process as anything but punishment. He had spent 32 years in the orbital habitats above the American seaboard, long enough to forget what a real atmosphere felt like pressing back against your eardrums. Long enough to forget, almost, why he had left Malaysia in the first place. The pod window showed cloud, then green, then the scar line of the equatorial corridor, the long gray ribbon the Vorath had gouged into the continent's shoulder the first time they came. That was 6 years ago. The second time, they'd stopped gouging and started building. Kamal pressed his thumb to the armrest panel and watched the altitude readout drop. He had not wanted to come back. That much he'd been honest about, at least with himself. In the small hours of whatever passed for night in the orbital housing blocks, where a man could go weeks without seeing a sky that wasn't synthetic. His supervisor at the consortium had phrased the posting as a request, but the body language of a man behind a reinforced desk, flanked by 2 Vorath liaison officers, communicated something more binding than that. Your clearance, your language profile, your historical connection to the RADA facility. We need someone the locals will open a door for. He had not asked which locals they meant. He'd learned not to ask questions that had only one answer. The pod settled into the receiving bay with a sound like a long exhale, and Kamal Haroon, 53 years old, twice divorced, currently the consortium's most senior multimedia infrastructure specialist, picked up his case and walked back into the country where he had been born. The receiving terminal at what used to be CLIA was clean. That surprised him. He had expected the particular chaos of occupation, the improvised checkpoints, the queues, the low-grade humiliation of papers and retinal scans and questions asked by beings who did not fully understand the answers but held the authority to act on them anyway. There was some of that. The Vorath Customs Post was staffed by 2 of them, their secondary eye membranes half drawn in the terminal's artificial light, their translation collars cycling through polite forms of address they'd clearly learned from a database rather than from actual interaction. But the humans around him moved, with a quiet that wasn't fear. It was something more considered than that. A young man was waiting at the arrival's gate with a board that had Kamal's name on it, spelled correctly, which felt like a small miracle. Ensign Kamal. I'm Daniel. The young man offered his hand and Kamal took it, firm grip, clear eyes. The kind of face that had grown up with the occupation as its backdrop and had decided not to let it be the only thing on the canvas. I'm the junior systems coordinator at RADA. I'll take you in. They sent a junior systems coordinator to pick me up from the airport. Everyone else was busy. Kamal looked at him. With what? Daniel paused just long enough to tell Kamal the pause was deliberate. With keeping things running. He smiled and reached for the heavier of Kamal's 2 bags. The van's outside. The drive took 40 minutes. Kamal watched the landscape and tried to reconcile it with the version he'd packed away in the long-term storage of memory. The roads were better than he remembered. The pylons carrying the Vorath power relay network were impossible to miss. Bone-white columns every 200 meters, each one humming at a frequency that sat just below the register of conscious attention and just above the threshold of the body's baseline anxiety. The relay network was the condition. The Vorath had made that clear in the second year. You can keep your infrastructure, your governance structures, your customs, and your languages, but the power grid is ours now. The atmosphere dome that protected Radha and a dozen other designated human settlements drew its breath from those relays. Kamal knew the technical specifications of the dome better than most people alive. That was why he was here. Tell me about the anomaly, he said. Daniel glanced at him from the driver's seat. They told you about the anomaly? They told me there was a systems irregularity that required a specialist. That's the language they used. I've been in this industry long enough to know what systems irregularity means when it's said by a man behind a desk with a Vorath liaison officer on each side of him. The weather management subsystem has been throwing non-sequential variance codes for 11 days. The dome's atmospheric regulation is still within tolerance, but the tolerance band has been narrowing. If it continues at current rate of drift, the system will hit critical threshold in. Daniel checked the dashboard display. Approximately 9 days from now. What happens at critical threshold? The dome's thermal buffer inverts. Radha would experience a sustained pressure event, unmanageable weather. The kind that empties a facility. Who else knows the extent of it? Within RADA, the senior counsel, the consortium technical liaison, that's the Varath officer assigned to us, has been notified, but their read of the variance codes was different from ours. They calculated 22 days before critical threshold. Daniel's jaw moved slightly. We don't think that calculation was an error. Kamal was quiet for a moment. Through the window, the first structures of Radha were becoming visible. The outer ring of residential modules, their solar ceramic panels catching the afternoon light, their lines clean and considered. Someone had planted trees along the perimeter access road, tall ones, already established. Whoever had done it years ago in full expectation of staying.
They want the dome to fail,
Kamal said. We think they want to know if it can be made to fail, slowly, without obvious interference. And if it can, Daniel let the implication sit. Then every other dome settlement on the continent becomes a question rather than an answer. Kamal watched a group of children crossing a pedestrian bridge above the access road, walking in a loose cluster, one of them carrying what looked like a science project. How long has Radha been operational? Full occupancy, 6 years. The founders started building 2 years before the second contact. Someone planned ahead. Someone believed in something worth planning for. Kamal did not answer that. But he kept watching the children until the van curved away, and they disappeared behind the tree line. The council met him that evening in a room that smelled of old wood and coffee and the specific warm air quality of a space that had held a lot of people over a long time. There were 5 of them, 4 men and a woman, all in their 40s or early 50s, the kind of people whose faces had achieved a particular settledness that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with decision. Their names were Haris, Johari, Azim, Farida, and Rahman. They were, Kamal understood from the briefing materials he'd read on the descent pod, the administrative nucleus of a community of 4,000 people. They did not ask him about his credentials. They did not make speeches. They poured him coffee, and they laid out what they knew, and they waited for him to think. It took him longer than he would have liked to admit to recognize the quality of that silence as generosity. The variance codes, he said finally. Show me the actual sequence. Farida placed a data slate on the table. Kamal studied the numbers. His eyes moved through them the way a reader's eyes move through text in a language they know well. Not reading for meaning, but reading for the rhythm beneath meaning, the place where the syntax breaks and something else is being said. These aren't drift codes, he said. No, said Harris. Someone introduced a recursive loop into the calibration layer. It's designed to look like hardware fatigue, the kind of degradation pattern that models as organic, the kind you'd expect in a system that's been running for 6 years without. He stopped, looked up. Without a scheduled deep maintenance cycle, which we've been requesting from the consortium technical liaison for 4 months, Azim said, and which has been deferred, repeatedly. Kamal set the slate down. The room was very quiet for a moment, except for the distant, barely audible hum of the dome's systems, a sound that had probably become so constant to these people that they noticed it most when it changed. Who has right access to the calibration layer? He asked. In theory, only the consortium liaison and the Radha systems team, said Farida. In practice, someone else does. Kamal picked up the slate again. There's a secondary access signature buried in the 4th variant sequence. It's been masked to look like background process noise, but the timing is too regular. He enlarged the relevant line. Whoever did this understands the system deeply. This isn't an outsider hack. This is someone who has been inside the calibration interface. The council exchanged glances. We have one other person with that level of system familiarity, Daniel said from the corner where he'd been standing quietly. A resident. Her name is Lily. Lily was 26, and she had arrived at Radha 8 months ago from what remained of the northern urban corridor, carrying a single bag, a stated intention to change her life, and technical skills that were, by any assessment, exceptional. She had been assigned to the infrastructure team within a month of arrival. She was good with people, good with machines, and had an instinct for the kind of patient diagnostic work that separated engineers who understood systems from engineers who merely operated them. Kamal found her in the systems monitoring room at 9 in the evening, running routine checks on the dome's pressure equalization nodes. She did not look startled when he came in. She looked, he thought, like someone who had been expecting a conversation and had rehearsed several versions of it. Ensik Kamal, she said. She did not stand. I heard you arrived today. I heard you're the best infrastructure technician in the facility. Who told you that? Daniel. He didn't phrase it that way, but that's what he meant. Kamal pulled a chair close and sat. Show me what you're working on. She turned the monitoring display toward him. He studied it. For a while, neither of them spoke, and in that space, Kamal watched her hands on the interface controls. Capable hands, careful hands, but carrying a particular tension in the wrist that had nothing to do with concentration. You know about the variance codes, he said. I'm on the systems team, everyone knows. I mean, you know more than you should, from outside. A long pause. Her hands went still. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. His voice was not unkind. That surprised her, he could see it. She'd been braced for accusation and he'd given her something else. Someone gave you access to the calibration layer that you weren't supposed to have. And that person had an agenda for how you'd use it, which may or may not have been the agenda they told you about. The silence that followed was of a different quality. Not calculation, something more raw than that. They told me, she said finally, that the RADA system was already failing, that the calibration layer had a structural flaw the Council wasn't admitting to, that if I ran a specific diagnostic protocol through the secondary access channel, it would identify the flaw and let the Council fix it before anyone got hurt. She stopped. They said the Council knew about the access, that you were being brought in because of the flaw, not to find the access. Who told you this? She named a contact in the consortium's technical liaison office, not the Vorath officer, a human. A man who had been working in the interface between human settlements and the occupying authority long enough to have learned how the Vorath preferred to accomplish things. Not through direct force, but through the careful, plausible degradation of alternatives. Make the thing the humans depend on fragile, then let them watch it fail. Then offer, in a tone of helpfulness, to manage the replacement. Kamal sat with this for a moment. Outside the monitoring room's window, the night sky above Radha's dome showed its particular quality of darkness. Not quite natural, the faint internal luminescence of the atmospheric management layer giving the stars a slight halo they didn't have beyond the perimeter. They used you, he said. I know that now. Her voice was flat and controlled, which told him how much it cost to keep it that way. I ran the protocol 4 days ago. That's when the variance codes started deteriorating faster. Can you reverse it? She looked at him. I've been trying, quietly, without triggering the monitoring flag that would notify the consortium liaison. She turned back to the display. I got it back to 60% restoration before the recursive loop reasserted. It's self-reinforcing. Every time I close one aperture, it opens another. Show me. She showed him. He worked beside her for 2 hours, not speaking much, occasionally asking her to pull a specific data thread or hold an interface value stable while he ran a test sequence. She was as good as Daniel's assessment had implied. Better, possibly. Her hands had lost their tension about 40 minutes in, when the work had taken over and pushed everything else to the periphery the way work does for people who are genuinely suited to it. At 11:30, Kamal sat back and looked at the display. We can't close the loop from inside the calibration layer, he said. The recursive architecture is too deep. We'd need to drop the entire monitoring subsystem offline for a controlled reset. If we drop the monitoring subsystem, the dome loses its real-time variance correction. Any atmospheric instability during the reset window would be unmanaged. Yes. He looked at the ceiling for a moment as if doing arithmetic. What's the current atmospheric stability index? 91.4. And the forecast for the next 72 hours. She checked. Clear. High-pressure system sitting over the entire region for at least 3 days. Then we have a window. We'd need the council to authorize it. And the consortium liaison has to be notified of any planned monitoring downtime. Then we don't plan it, Kamal said. He looked at her. We prepare it. And then we execute it faster than a notification can be sent. She was very quiet. Then, that's technically a violation of the facility operating agreement. Yes, the Vorath liaison could use it as grounds to declare the facility in breach of its charter. They could try. But a facility that successfully corrects a critical system failure and restores full atmospheric management integrity is considerably harder to argue against than one that's in the process of atmospheric failure. He rubbed his eyes. They want us to fail slowly. We're going to succeed quickly instead. Those are different situations, and they produce different conversations. Lily looked at the display for a long moment. Then she picked up her interface tools and began running the prep sequence for a controlled subsystem drop. Her hands were steady. Kamal found his mother at 6 in the morning. He hadn't been looking for her. Not consciously, not yet. He'd been walking the perimeter of the residential quarter after leaving the monitoring room, partly to clear his head, and partly because he couldn't sleep, and partly because the particular quality of early light over a dome settlement is something you can't prepare for, even when you know it's coming. The dome diffuses sunrise into something softer and more even than the natural article. And in that light, the gardens and common spaces of Radha had a quality that stopped him more than once. She was in the community garden on the east side of the residential ring. He recognized the set of her shoulders before he recognized her face. A specific angle of concentration that had apparently survived 30 years and a son's determined absence without changing at all. She was on her knees in the vegetable beds, hands in the soil, moving with the unhurried precision of someone for whom this was not an early start, but simply the hour at which the day's work began. He stood at the garden gate for a moment. She had not heard him approach. "Ibu," he said. She turned. The light caught her face, and he saw, with a sensation he couldn't have named, that she was entirely unsurprised. Not resigned, not blank, actively unsurprised. The way a person looks when something they have quietly believed for a long time turns out to be true. "Kamal," she said, and stood. Soil on her hands, soil on her knees. "You're early. I didn't sleep. Come in." She unlatched the gate without ceremony. "There's water. I'll get you something to eat before the others arrive." He followed her in. They sat on a bench at the edge of the cultivated beds, and she gave him water and a small wrapped parcel of something warm from the basket she'd brought, and for a while they didn't talk about anything consequential. She asked about the journey. He told her. She asked about his back. She'd always worried about his back, something about the way he sat at screens for too long. And he told her it was fine, which was mostly true. She told him about the garden, which beds had been difficult this season, which had surprised her. The particular satisfaction, she said, of a thing growing that you'd put your hands to. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 4 years. Since the second year of Radha. She looked at the beds. "I came because Farida asked me to help with the community health program, but then," a small pause, "then it became clear this was where I should be. You could have told me you were here. You weren't ready to come back." She said it without reproach. "There's a difference between not being ready and not being able. I knew you'd come when it was time." Kamal looked at his hands. They were the same hands that had spent 3 decades managing systems for the consortium, ordering, optimizing, extracting maximum operational value from human and machine capital across orbital and surface installations from here to the Greenland relay. Good hands for that work, capable hands. He had thought, he realized, that coming back would feel like defeat. The 32-year project of building a life defined by distance had a logic of its own, and returning to the place of origin is always a form of argument with that logic. He had expected the argument to be painful. What he hadn't expected was the garden, the light, his mother's hands in soil at 6 in the morning, unhurried and purposeful. The 4,000 people already moving into the day behind him in a settlement built on the stubborn, uncomplicated belief that human beings could still decide what kind of place they wanted to live in. "The dome might fail," he said. "It might," his mother agreed. "I'm going to try to stop that. I know." She folded the wrapper from his food with the automatic neatness of a woman who had been folding things her whole life. "That's why you're here." She looked at him. "Are you good at it? At what they sent you to do?" Kamal thought about this seriously. "Yes," he said. "I think I am." His mother nodded, as if this was simply a thing that had been confirmed rather than decided. "Then go and do it," she said. "I'll have actual food ready by the time you're done." The preparation took the better part of 2 days. Kamal and Lily worked in shifts, her taking the monitoring room through the nights, him taking the mornings, meeting in the middle for handoffs that had the quality of a long conversation stretched across time. He taught her a system reset architecture he'd developed for the orbital facilities, a method of holding critical subsystem values in a frozen state buffer during a full diagnostic drop, so the dome's atmospheric management protocols could resume instantly rather than running through a standard warm-up sequence. It cut the vulnerability window from 42 minutes to under 9. She improved it. That took him genuinely by surprise. She found a way to parallel process 2 buffer streams that he'd always run sequentially, and when he sat with the code for 20 minutes, he could not find a flaw in the approach. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "I worked out the theory during the drive from the northern corridor." I've been waiting for a system complex enough to test it on. That's an 8-hour drive. I had time. Daniel ran interference with the consortium liaison office, generating a stream of routine technical queries that kept the Vorath officers' attention occupied with bureaucratic responses, while Kamal and Lily ran their final prep sequence. The council sat with what Kamal told them for a long, careful meeting, and then Harris said, simply, "Proceed." Rahan spent that evening composing a formal incident report to be transmitted to the consortium the moment the reset was complete. Not a request for permission, but a notification of an action taken. The framing was important. It was the difference between a community that had panicked and a community that had managed a crisis. At 2 in the morning on the third day after Kamal's arrival, with the high-pressure system sitting overhead like a held breath and the atmospheric stability index reading 92.1, Lily pulled the monitoring subsystem offline. The dome did not notice. That was the correct outcome, and it still produced in Kamal's chest a cold moment of something very close to prayer. 92.1 stability index meant the atmospheric conditions were currently self-sustaining at a level where real-time variance correction was not needed. The dome could breathe on its own for 8 minutes and 40 seconds, which was how long Lily's buffer architecture needed to hold. They worked in silence. Kamal ran the reset sequence through the calibration layer, moving through the recursive loop's structure, not by trying to close it. He'd given up on that approach, but by rebuilding the calibration layer underneath it, like replacing the floor beneath a locked door. The loop was still there. It had nothing to lock anymore. At 7 minutes and 12 seconds, Lily said quietly, "Variance codes are clearing." At 8 minutes and 4 seconds, Kamal ran the final alignment check. The calibration layer was clean. The subsystem buffer was holding full atmospheric management values, ready to resume. At 8 minutes and 39 seconds, 1 second ahead of schedule, Lily brought the monitoring subsystem back online. The dome exhaled. That was the only way Kamal could think to describe the change in the air. A barely perceptible shift. The quality of a sound going from recorded to live. The monitoring display flooded with green status indicators. Atmospheric stability index, 92.3. Rising. "We're clear," Lily said. Her voice was flat with precision, and Kamal could hear the thing underneath it. Not triumph exactly. Something steadier and more permanent than triumph. Relief of the kind that has weight to it. He sat back. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd been running on 3 hours of sleep across 2 days, and whatever his mother had sent with Daniel the previous afternoon. "Well," he said. "Well," said Lily. He looked at the display, all green. The atmospheric stability index reading, ascending toward its optimal band, with the unhurried confidence of a system that had been put back together correctly and knew it. "Send Rahman the reset log," he said, "and the full technical report with the access signature and the recursive loop architecture. Everything. Exact timestamps, the source of the secondary access credential, the name of the contact who gave it to you." He looked at her. "You understand that has to be in the report." She met his eyes. "I understand. It means a difficult conversation. Difficult conversations don't get easier by being avoided." She began assembling the file. "Someone told me that once. A long time ago, in a different context, but the principle holds." "Who told you that?" She almost smiled. "Someone who believed it. She sent the file to Rahman." "Now what?" Kamal looked at the green display for a moment longer. Then he looked at the window, where the dome's inner luminescence was beginning to pale with the first suggestion of morning. "Now," he said, "I'm going to go and find my mother, and she's going to make me eat something, and then I'm going to sleep for approximately 12 hours. He stood. "After that, we're going to have a conversation with the council about Radha's long-term maintenance independence. This facility should not need a consortium specialist to fix a system its own team can manage. And the only reason it currently does is that consortium access protocols have been structured to make sure it stays that way. That's a much bigger problem than the variance codes. Yes, but it has the same solution. People who understand the system, working from inside it, faster than an obstacle can be introduced." He picked up his case from the corner where he'd dropped it 2 days ago. "You're a good engineer, Lily." She looked at him steadily. The particular quality of that look was the look of someone in the process of deciding, not about a fact, but about a direction. "I'm still learning," she said. "Yes," said Kamal, "so am I." He slept until midday. When he woke, his mother had left food on the small table beside the dormitory bed he'd been assigned. A covered plate, still warm, with a fold of paper beside it that had nothing written on it. That was enough. Downstairs, the common areas of Radha were busy with the particular organized movement of a community in the middle of an ordinary morning. A group of older residents were moving chairs for what looked like an upcoming meeting. Two engineers Kamal didn't know yet were deep in a conversation over a technical schematic spread across one of the communal tables, coffee going cold beside them. Three children were chasing each other through the garden corridor at a volume that suggested no adult supervision for at least the past 5 minutes. The consortium liaison notification had gone out at 0247 that morning. Kamal had seen the response on Daniel's dashboard before he'd gone to sleep. A formal acknowledgement of the incident report, a request for the full technical documentation already sent, and a clause noting that an independent review of the access credential irregularity would be initiated. The tone was the tone of a document written by someone aware that the ground had shifted slightly underfoot and unsure yet what that meant for the architecture they'd been building on it. It meant this: a community that had handled its own crisis, documented it fully, and was standing in the morning with its dome intact and its systems clean was a different category of conversation from a community in the process of failing. The Vorath calculated in advantages and vulnerabilities. This was a facility that had just demonstrated it could correct a critical failure faster than the failure could be engineered. That was new information. It would be processed. The implications would take time to work through. Time in this case was what Radha had bought itself. Kamal took his plate back to the garden and ate beside the vegetable beds where his mother had been working that morning. The beds were empty of people now, the soil still damp from the early watering, the plants doing what plants do in good conditions, quietly, without announcement, going about the specific and unhurried business of growth. He thought about his ex-wives, both of them, in the way you think about people you handled badly when you were a different version of yourself. He thought about 32 years of orbital housing blocks and consortium performance metrics and the particular insulating quality of a life built around professional competence to the exclusion of most else. He thought about a young engineer with soil-stained hands who could run buffer architectures in her head during an 8-hour drive and was still deciding what kind of person she was going to be. He thought about Daniel, who had collected him from the airport with a firm handshake and a careful pause and an entire settlement of 4,000 people living behind his eyes like a country he was quietly responsible for. He thought about the children crossing the pedestrian bridge on the day he arrived, one of them carrying a science project, and how that image had lodged in him without his permission and was still there. The Vorath had studied human architecture, had studied human infrastructure, human technology hierarchies, human political structures, human economic dependencies, had identified load-bearing points and introduced careful, deniable pressures at each of them. It was a sophisticated strategy. It was, by most measures, working. What they hadn't studied, what Kamal was not sure they had the cognitive architecture to study, was this: the way a community garden produces tomatoes in the same months that a dome system is under targeted sabotage. The way an engineer rebuilds a floor under a locked door. The way a mother leaves food on a table beside a sleeping man and puts nothing in writing because nothing needs to be written. The way people who believe in something particular about how life should be lived don't stop believing it because the conditions become difficult. Don't stop building because something is trying to make the building fail. Don't stop planting because there's a serious question about whether the harvest will be reached. The Vorath understood pressure. They did not understand what pressure, applied to the right material, produces. Kamal finished eating. He washed his plate at the garden tap and left it on the drying rack beside the shed. Then he walked back inside, found Daniel in the communal workspace, sat down across from him and said, "I need to talk to you about a proposal for Radha's Maintenance Independence Program. And I'm going to need your mother's contact at the consortium's technical credentialing office, because what I'm about to suggest is going to require some paperwork, and I'd rather have someone who reads the paperwork carefully before signing it." Daniel pulled up a blank document. "Where do you want to start?" Kamal thought about it. "With what we already know how to do," he said. "That's always the right place." Outside, the dome held its weather. The atmospheric stability index climbed, steady and unhurried, toward its optimal band. The plants in the community garden continued their specific and irreplaceable work. And the hum of Radha, 4,000 people, one morning, all of it ongoing, was indistinguishable to anyone listening, from a settlement that had never been afraid.